You know, Joe Biden has chosen a man for Secretary of Defense that it seems like his one distinguishing characteristic, the one thing that seems to make him stand out for this role, is he's black. Think about that. The thing that everybody is talking about is basically he's black. Joe Biden is choosing a black Secretary of Defense, as if this is momentous. I understand that there are some people that look at race as distinguishing characteristics for these things. But what's more important? The fact that he's black, or that he is going to be in charge of policy, that he's going to be giving advice to the President of the United States, which is Joe Biden. I'm making the point that its distinguishing characteristic shouldn't be his race. The distinguishing characteristic should be what advice he's going to give, the policies that he espouses. And I strongly suspect that if Joe Biden chose him, Joe Biden is choosing him because of a continuity of thought, because of an agreement in regards to the way Joe Biden wants to run the world, and this particular person, as the Department of Defense, stewardship of that is endemic of the way Joe Biden wants to run it. Interestingly to note, this gentleman also on a board of Raytheon, one of the largest weapons companies in the world. So the guy that Joe Biden chose just so happened to be a general. Yeah, so he had to get the agreement to get him out of the military right now, because we get sketchy about having a person serve immediately after a military stint. We're supposed to have a civilian rule, civilian authority, and it gets a little bit dicey when the guy just gets out of the military and his thinking and framing of the world was within that context. And you need to function in an individualistic, or not individualistic, of a country capacity. His point of view need to be of that of the country, not specifically militaristic concerns. And yes, there could be a difference in those things. So the idea is that you give a break with time in between before the person goes. Now, Congress can get around this by them just saying, hey, Congress, can you give me a break on this? So that's what Joe Biden is asking. I am making the point that it just seems like the distinguishing characteristic that media focuses on is race. And it's bizarre. It is strange, slightly unnerving even. It's as if the policy of this doesn't matter. Media exponentially walking in this kind of double consciousness thing where, yes, the person is going to be doing things in that job on a day-to-day basis. They're going to be making policy decisions. They're going to be following the will and the discretion of the president as they go about their duties. But those people are going to have a certain gravity themselves, a little certain leeway themselves. And ultimately, you would expect them to fulfill the president's mission. Why is it not important what that mission is? Think about what I'm asking you. That person's black, great. That person's gay, great. That person's a hermaphrodite, great. That person's a transsexual, great. That person is something else, great. What are they doing in the office? What color they are is infinitely less important, especially if that color is subordinate to a way of thought and a way of action that precludes them doing anything on the context of race that is in the interest of anybody out there in the context of that race or that particular identity. My point is, oftentimes what media does and what Democrats do is make this weird severance of identity from plight. It's very strange. It's almost as if people are put up as tokens, and those tokens are there entirely to give this implicit point of view that by having somebody that looks like you being in a certain position, that somehow the decisions that they make are going to somehow benefit you. That's ludicrous. Just because they change the outside doesn't necessarily mean there's not continuity on the inside. And I make the point to you, you've had a black president. That black president's blackness does not stop him from giving 95% of the income gains to the top 1%. It didn't stop him from letting homeowners go bust. It didn't stop him from protecting Wall Street. It didn't stop him from pushing for the Trans-Pacific Partnership or destroying Libya, having all those people killed in Syria. I'm making the point that his blackness didn't stop any of that stuff. He had a certain political ideology that superseded all of these notions of race and identity. I'm making the point that you are being had if you are following this media's love fest over Joe Biden's administration because it is multiracial. It can be multiracial. I applaud that. But I don't applaud it if what it ends up is being a con for just the same old with a black face or a trans face or a gay face, basically promoting it. If you're running empire, you're running empire. Adding a black face to it doesn't incrementally make it better. It's the same empire. It's the same corporatism. Raytheon is still, with its connection to this guy, is probably going to do very quite well, especially from the standpoint of stocks and especially from the standpoint of trades. You don't even know if the decisions that he makes is in some way emboldened by the fact that he used to work for Raytheon, even if it's just a minor implicit bias that gives a gentle win on his choices and decisions and the way he looks at the world, the framing of the world. His blackness doesn't matter in this context. That's the point I'm trying to make here. The empire stuff is what matters. The empire stuff is the stuff that keeps trucking along. The militarism, the corporatism, the system being rigged. That is what ticks along. And putting a black face on it or putting some of these identities on it is a nice way to cover it. Think about it for the moment. If you could get away with the notion of progressivism on your product label, especially now, you might do it. The problem is you got to have bang for your buck. And progressive means more than just somebody standing there. Meaning a guy standing there at the wall has no capacity to be progressive in any particular way because he's not doing anything. Progressive requires action. It requires some being, some doing. And in that doing, context, which can make a person one way or the other. I'm just trying to make the point that they are trying to sever identity or try to make identity as if it somehow means that there is something that that person is doing that benefits you in some particular way just because they're there. And I am making the point that what would benefit you is policy. What matters, and this is policy, whether that person is black, white, gay, straight, a blue duck, it doesn't necessarily matter. What matters is policy. What policy are you going to implement? What are you actively trying to do when you're in that office? Who are you and what is the track record? That's what matters. And that is the thing that is, weirdly enough, entirely ignored. Oh, Joe Biden has an all-female communications team. Great. That's not bad. Joe Biden has put this woman in this position. Here's a man in this. All of those things are great. Multiculturalism is awesome. I'm making the point that what supersedes the multiculturalism thing is policy. It's one thing to have a black female vice president. It is another thing for people to get Medicare for all. Between the two things, the Medicare for all directly deals with the people at the bottom of the income scale that look like her. Her being a vice president doesn't. I'm trying to make this difference, that there is a difference between policy that is to the benefit of a particular aggrieved class, as opposed to throwing the theatrics of a token to just be the face of the corporate militaristic machine that doesn't give a shit about that aggrieved class. There's a difference in those things. Look, there's this weird thing that it just seems they're trying to do to make it look like these things are separable in some way. That you can somehow separate the ideology or the identity and have that as a thing unto itself and talk about it as if it's progressive. I guess my point here is not. The strangest aspects of this is this kind of double consciousness. It's as if, in order to make this stick, which is, I think this is a fair assessment when people are talking about Biden, they're talking about the multicultural, multiracial campaign and everything else, as if that's the point. That's not the point. The front person is not the point. Benefiting those multiracial demographics is the point. Anything less than that is theatrics, or which is kind of my point. Also, there's this really bizarre thing that happens where media gives this perspective that being anti-racist is a lefty quality. It is. I accept it. But think about what that means in the context of multiracial, multicultural interactions with one another. If multiracial is basically, let's say, trends to the left, but do you need to be a lefty to not be racist? Think about what I'm asking. I understand that on some level, there's always going to be some kind of political casting or some political categorization because people are people and we tend to categorize. Fair enough. And if you want to make the case that says anti-racist or integration or this kind of cosmopolitanism, that is something that tends to be on the left who wants to kumbaya and everything. Fair enough. Great. But at a certain point, it's not politics. At a certain point, it's a hegemonic norm. Yes, it's still ideological, but it's so norm and ingrained as a hegemonic norm that it's almost goes without saying. It's kind of like an argument about rape. Nobody has to argue whether or not rape is okay, rape is good, rape is... Nobody makes that argument anymore. People accept that it's wrong. And nobody makes this distinction that says if you're against rape, you're on the left. And so anybody that's just so happens to be against rape just so happens to be on the left. It's nonsense. But that's kind of the weird argument that they make on this notion of race. That if you are a person of color, or if you are good with people of color, then you are somehow on the left, despite the fact that you can have a billion other atrocious qualities. Hitler was good with dogs, so by definition of him being good with dogs, he's a great person, he's a lefty. No, I'm making the same point with this. Just because a person is not racist doesn't make him a lefty. And at some point, our society needs to get to the point that that's just a given. Yes, the person can be racist, but I'm making the point that the person, whether or not they're racist or not, should not go into their designation as a left-winger or right-winger. It should go into a designation of them just being a normal, good fucking human being, despite the other stuff. So the idea that just because Biden has all of these multiracial or multicultural people in his administration, that somehow ends up on the left should be abolished right off the bat. I am, at least I'm trying to make the case or make the argument that acting as if Biden's campaign or Biden's place is multiracial, and because it's multiracial, it is somehow anti-racist, is almost basically like saying that to be non-racist means you're somehow on the left. And I'm saying how weird of a perspective that is. Is being anti-racist just a hegemonic norm? And if it is a norm, why does Biden get credit for having an anti or multiracial, diverse coalition of people in his administration? Get credit for it, that's fine. But you shouldn't get credit for it as if it is on the left. If indeed our hegemonic norm to some degree is anti-racism. I'm making the point that Biden is getting credit for something. And the public and the media is coming to this weird conclusion that just by virtue of being diverse, you are anti-racist. And the epitome of this is if a black face or a gay face or trans face, in and of itself, by definition, with that logic, is anti-racist. Or for that matter, is progressive. And I'm saying it's ludicrous. There are all sorts of people that are people of color that are not progressive. And acting as if Joe Biden's campaign is just because he has all of these people of color in it is ludicrous. It's utterly ridiculous. And the media, for whatever reason, always throws back this notion of multiculturalism as if this is the end-all, be-all, and the epitome of everything dealing with to be a lefty. It's not. They do it because it is easier to do that than to deal with the economic issues that lefties tend to bring up. If you're a corporation, you don't want to deal with the idea of paying people higher wages. You don't want to deal with this notion of people having higher worker protections or unions. All of those things are a pain in your ass. You don't pay Democrats to push for those things. In fact, you pay them for the opposite. To hold up that energy, to hold up that momentum into getting those things accomplished that will be in your best interest. Do you believe corporations honestly want to have Medicare for all, but they would have to pay more taxes? They want the federal dollars to be spent in their interest, not yours. Hence, these policies. And I'm making the point of saying that because I'm trying to make the point that the faces that they show you is often in lieu of those changes. Instead of actually dealing with Medicare for all, maybe they'll accept a black face as a win. Maybe instead of accepting elimination of student debt, maybe they'll expect a Hispanic in this new position that's a milestone. and they'll leave me alone about it for a period of time. It's this theatrics that needs to stop. Just because something is a different identity or of a let's say a minority identity does not, in fact, make it progressive. And Joe Biden is basically leveraging the media's multicultural fervor right now to ignore all notions of policy. Like, share, and of course, subscribe.